So, Grail Country is here for our final installment of the Apocalypse of John, of the Apocalypse of Saint John by Emil Bock. We're going to be talking about the last two chapters of the book this time. We are down a couple of our horse persons today of our exploration into the apocalypse, because both of them have started new jobs, and that can be obviously stressful and demanding and reduces your bandwidth for things like, engaging in interesting conversations about little known esoteric Christian works. So Sherry, did you have anything you wanted to dive in right away, or did you want to give a brief overview of like what's talked about?
Well, I don't know how brief you can be with this, because
I can attempt a summary.
Okay.
So essentially, his primary focus. So in chapter 11, hold on a second. Let me go back here. Look at the title of the chapter. Whoops. Chapter 11, he focuses a lot on the marriage.
Yeah.
On the marriage, and what the marriage imagery means. And he talks about how like a part of the understanding of that should be the marriage of the soul to the spirit, and that's like and then basically an explication of that and going into further depth on that.
Yep.
And then the meaning of other specific symbols within that is the primary focus. Excuse me. And then the final chapter is on the meaning of the heavenly Jerusalem. Like, so what are we to make of this image of the heavenly Jerusalem that is like that comes at the end of all the other sequence of events in the text. And he analyzes like the symbolic meanings of like the features of the city, and what we can make of that and what it suggests. He also talks about in that chapter how there tends to be a materialization of things that are spiritual, and then right. And then ironically a spiritualization of things that are actually supposed to be understood to be actually coming to bear within the actual world. So
I thought that was interesting. I have a little, when we get there, I wrote a little note of about something that,
So that's just sort of a brief overview of the things that are covered. And I see you had a text that you're ready to just go to start the conversation. So let's just dive into that, Sherry.
Well, what I thought, I got a lot out of the first chapter, a lot more out of it, because it for me anyway, personally, it speaks to this this reciprocity of knowing God and knowing yourself, right? This marriage between the Lamb and the bride, and
and the union between divinity and humanity is the marriage.
Exactly. And so you can't, like, and I probably don't express this, I'm still learning how, but to me this is the understanding that you gain, the wisdom, like this even ties into sophiology, because this is what Sophia does. It bridges the gap, that dissonance that we feel between the spiritual and the material, right? Between the Lamb and the bride, between ourselves and God.
Right, because she inspires us to actually to go into that gap.
Yeah.
And to close that gap. I think that's very, very, very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yesterday, I had a conversation with Jess and Emily and Chris, and Jess mentioned, and I still haven't read it, I have to read that, there's a poem, I think it's chapter 28 of Job, which is like a poem about wisdom. And And in that poem, it talks about seeking wisdom in the depths, right?
Yes.
Going down into the depths below anything that we already know. I'm trying to think of how Jess described it because I haven't read it yet. And like, I think it says at one point, even the birds don't know where to find it, or, the things down in the earth don't know where it is because it's even further down, right? It's all the way down. And of course, that resonates with this idea of going down, right? The birth and the death, right? Down into Hades and the resurrection and the U-shaped journey. And for me, it also goes into the whole going down into yourself in a way that
right. Yeah, especially, go ahead.
Well, it's
finish your thought.
It's unknown to you, that space, right? That space, that where you're going, where you have to find that wisdom is actually unknown to you, and everything outside of you doesn't know where it is either. Like that's to me, just from the brief description that Jess gave me of the poem, which you still have to read, that's what it says to me, that you don't know what's down there, right? And that is where you find wisdom. So, right. and I think it correlates to this marriage, right? Anyway.
And I think part of it, part of it is because the wisdom is related to the humility of learned ignorance. So that's
exactly.
It's connected to a ceasing to have to know,
and a wanting to know what you wanting to know what you don't want to know.
Right. And I think it has something to do with the actual structure of person too.
Yes.
Makes me think of the Platonic theory of knowledge, where for Plato, all knowing is a form of remembering, right?
Right.
Well, if you keep going, ultimately, our souls are well, not our souls, because they're tied to our animal being, but let's say our spirits are fractals of the divine.
Mm-hmm.
They're sourced directly from the divine. God breathed into Adam's nostrils, right?
Yeah.
So because of that means that the depths of our spirit are actually infinite.
Exactly.
So that's why it's so hard to find those hidden depths, and we'll never exhaust them. There's always going to be new things coming into our knowing.
Yeah.
And I think the key is to humbly and patiently wait upon them to reveal themselves.
Right. And this gets to Mary pondering things, putting things in her heart and pondering them.
Right. Yes, this is exactly what Mary does. Yeah, you're right.
Exactly what she does.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, and we talked about it's actually in this text too.
And heart, and heart, and I know the text is in Greek, but still, I think that, it's Greek written by people who come from a Jewish cultural context, and the Hebrew word love is both mind and heart, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that's at play. Yeah, which actually ties us back to the text, because one of the things he talks about is that how essentially we need to join faith to knowing, but the kind of knowledge he's talking about is very different from what we normally think about, because he's talking about spiritual knowing.
Right, but he does emphasize that we will want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
That we'll want to throw all reason and all thought and all abstract thinking and that whole process. We'll want to just throw it out and say it's garbage. But we have to push through it. And this is
right. That's the desire for the return to original participation that's not accessible to us.
That's right.
In Barfieldian terms.
Right. And And Barfield says the exact same thing. Like that's really the whole thrust of Barfield's message is,
right.
you know,
Because it's and I mean, not surprising that they would be aligned because they're both connected to Steiner, so they're both evolution of consciousness thinkers. So for them, like it's something that we had to go through in the evolution of our consciousness.
Yeah, and are going through
in order to develop the capability of ego consciousness, which can then be joined to the ego consciousness, which is not to be understood the way people normally understand ego, because Bock is very clear that the higher ego is tied directly to Christ. So it is the indwelling of the Christ ego within. That is the goal of this evolution of consciousness.
Those are the blazing eyes.
So Barfield's final participation, Bock is clear. Barfield doesn't go into theology, but his Anglicanism and his religious leanings make it clear that his understanding of final participation ultimately is that participation in the higher ego is being in Christ, which is why I won't go there, but there are certain people of a reformed bent who have commented on Barfield who kind of don't really understand what he means by final participation.
No, because it assumes,
because they see it at they're so yeah.
Well, it doesn't assume total depravity.
Right.
Like what it is two halves of the whole. There's the human half and the divine half, and the whole is theosis.
Well, there's also not a possibility of a negative final participation, because you can't be in final participation unless you're in the higher ego consciousness, which means to be in Christ. So there's not.
That's right.
That's not actually. It's what Barfield sees as a negative is sort of a sorcerous use of the collective representations, which is totally different. Anyway, that's a sidetrack.
Yeah. Well, in the text here, I think it's on page, wait, I'm gonna put my glasses on here. 164.
164.
He says, what does the apocalypse mean when it speaks of the marriage of the Lamb? Are we to understand simply Christ by the Lamb? Among the beings of the higher worlds, there is none in whom cosmic love and the capacity for sacrifice have been so completely embodied as in Christ. Nevertheless, through the picture of the Lamb, we are directed to an all-embracing world principle. We perceive in it love as the essence of God, as it is when it can be fully revealed through the openness of men's hearts. The world in which it is possible that love can turn into wrath has sunk into the abyss. Humanity is the loving bride. To the love from below, love from above can answer, undiminished and undimmed. The mystery is fulfilled in which Goethe speaks at the end of Faust. Whoe'er espies unweariedly is not beyond redeeming, and if he feels the grace of love that from on high is given, the blessed hosts that wait above shall welcome him to heaven. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage with that, because I think that's an important foundation, that love is the essence of God, or as the essence of God, and that it's completely embodied in Christ, and that it is an all-embracing principle, which I think is important. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out.
No, that's good. What do you think he means when he says it's an all-embracing principle?
Well, I think that's the fractal nature of it. Like that it's the pattern that you see. And I mean, he goes on further to elaborate on all of it. But it was the primal sacrifice of the Lamb that set creation in motion, right? The future sacrifice of divine love begins to be revealed when the new manifestation of Christ, the new creation, springs up. So
he really shows how Christ is the center of all things.
Yeah.
because he's both it's the action of Christ that both initiates the creation and the process of becoming or evolution through time.
Yeah.
The potential for change, the potential out of the changes somehow initiates the potential for change.
Right. And I think,
right?
and I like to hammer this point home all the time, that love is dynamic, right? That love loves unto purity. So that which is not lovely, it makes more lovely. Like it's kind of like, when I say that phrase from McDonald, I often think of a drill. Because the drill, if you're drilling a hole, the drill isn't thinking about drilling the hole. It's just doing that. That's what a drill does, right? That which is not, drillable, it makes more drillable. You know what I'm saying? Like it just keeps going.
Right.
And it
well, but
it
that's good. That's good though. The drill, because that's exactly what I was pointing toward is like how love is actually a transformative power.
Exactly.
So even though even though, right, exactly, which is why I say things sometimes like that yes, God is unmoved mover because he is motion.
Exactly.
Like I really like the image of like of just like an infinite fountain just endlessly flowing forth from its source.
Yeah.
Like you can't locate where it begins or ends.
Right. And the thing is,
So,
like the drill has this spiral motion, right? And it's transforming the thing that it's drilling,
right?
But it doesn't change the fact that it's a drill.
Right.
You take that bit out of the mechanism, and there it is. It's. I mean, this is my farmer version of.
I love your farmer versions.
Because I was drilling the other day, I was like, this is exactly what the immutability of God is.
See, I love that you can think like that. No, I'll tell you what, like I've had lots of theological thoughts when I've been in the middle of tending my barbecue pit, for sure.
Yes, right.
Lots of them.
Yeah. And so because Bock lays the foundation with love, and I think
it's literally the foundation, like, and that's like the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. Like exactly. That's another layer of meaning there.
You're right.
Right. It is found. Like love is the thing in which the creation is founded.
Right. Which is always in motion and always transforming that which is around it, because that's what it does. Like the drill, right? The drill will always transform the thing.
Right.
And so he says here on page 165.
Okay.
I'll just read the last sentence from 164. Even that section of humanity which escapes the Babylonian plunge into the abyss finds that the step from the whore to the bride requires continuous and intensive spiritual activity. Without cooperation from man's inmost being, a new Babylon is forever rising of itself. So a battle must be fought between the two cities which the writer of the Apocalypse saw in great double vision at the end of the path. There comes a warlike host galloping on white horses. So, and then further down he says, the robes of pure shining linen in which the wedding guests were clad are now seen as the robes of the army. So to me, this is the antidote to stasis. If the drill can't drill, then nothing is happening, right? You're not, there's no transformation.
Well, you can see the necessity. You can see both the necessity for that transformation and for human action, because he actually sees the rider on the white horse as not representing Christ, but humanity in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why it stops short of being able to actually like overcome Satan. himself, like that, like an angel has to intervene to do that. But if it
Yeah.
were, if the rider on the white horse were simply Christ, and that we really were just waiting for like a divine rescue mission and to Jesus to come back in conqueror mode, riding a white horse, like literally physically in the material world, and put, material, then, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think you get what I'm saying though.
I do.
Because he flips how most people read the text, like within American Christendom, American
Yeah.
Christianity. Like most people read the text as like the proclamation of a divine rescue mission that is coming. Well, Bock is saying that absolutely the spiritual realm is cooperating and acting here, but there is still a role for the humanity that is in Christ and united to Christ to play in defeating evil, essentially.
Exactly.
Overcoming materiality. And
Well,
it's not through, and it's symbolic. It's not through actual like armed resistance, right? So Bach isn't suggesting that we should like,
no. But it is that at the same time, because
right.
because if we want to just like play out my drill analogy here, because I think it works pretty good. He talks about the whore of Babylon continuing to rise up, right? Like it says here, where is that now?
You just read it.
Yeah, I know.
That basically that the horror like will continue to rise up.
So it's like the board,
because it's a prince, because the whore of Babylon is essentially the materialist principle within us.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the part of us that wants to go down into the material bestial level and to behave as if we have there's no soul or spirit within us.
I almost think it's not even a question of wanting to. It just is, like this is the thing that I keep coming to, because if like I've had experiences where I'm trying to hammer or drill something into a board and I hit a knot and it just doesn't want to, nothing goes in.
Right.
Right. Because the knot's so hard. And that experience is the board rising up against me. Okay. The board just continuously is rising up, and it's become my enemy because I have this task, right, that I need to accomplish. And the board is hindering that. So then the battle is fought. Like this is all metaphorical, but it's all true at the same time.
Right. Because it's actually what's being overcome is actually like our own lower nature.
Right. It's there. It's the board. Right.
And yeah. So
maybe that's too simple, but
what was that?
Maybe my analogy is too simple.
No, absolutely. That's I think that's very good. There was a part that I wanted to read for Michael Martin's sake.
Cool.
for a friend of the channel, Michael Martin, because I know he talks about the chemical wedding of Christian Rosencrines, which is a text that Michael has worked with a great deal.
Okay.
So he says, at the peak of the Middle Ages, a rich anthology of books of poetry and devotion grew up around the mystery of the marriage of soul and spirit. The Flemish mystic Jan van Riesebrück, who belonged to a group of the Friends of God and to the Council of the Brothers of Communal Life, wrote the wonderful little book, The Adornment of the Spiritual Wedding. Like all books of this type, it was a kind of breviary, a book of meditation in which the soul is led forward step by step through the stages by which it will attain to inward penetration by the divine and will become the bride of Christ. The chemical wedding of Christian Rosencrines is both a conclusion and a climax to the meditative poetry of the Middle Ages. This little book was written at the beginning of the 17th century by Johannes Valentinus Andre, who later, as an ecclesiastical commissioner in Swabia, became a good churchman and would have nothing more to do with the precious thing, which as a young man he had been inspired to create. The significance of this book lies in the fact that the store of pictures presents a means by which medieval mysticism may be developed into a way of discipline for the soul, suited to the approaching age of natural science. Chemical wedding means literally chemical wedding, but it is not a chemistry of material substances, but a union between the human soul and the divine spirit, which assembles the chemical union of two substances and extends the effect of the process of spiritual permeation into the realm of the body. For a long time, pictures of the spiritual wedding were kept alive in fairy tales. This is why there is so often a wedding at the end of fairy tales. Why is there a wedding so often at the end of fairy tales? This is because they depict what happens within the soul. So they also describe how the soul finds the spirit or the spirit finds the soul. When the young man who is regarded as a simpleton in the fairy tale eventually passes all the tests and so frees the king's daughter from the spell and wins her as his bride, we see how the soul imprisoned in the tower of the body can eventually be released through the courage of the higher ego. But there are also fairy stories which, like the parable of the 10 virgins, show the soul on the path of suffering and trial until the king's son comes to wake her from her spellbound sleep and make her his bride. To these belong, among others, Snow White and the Sleeping Beauty. In a variety of poetic forms, apocalyptic visions of Christ shine through the fairy tales.
Where did you read that from? I can't find it. I'm just.
Oh, it's just before the section you read, on page. Let's see.
Well, that's why I didn't find it.
It's on page 163.
Right.
Yeah, I love it when he talks about fairy tales, for starters.
Yeah, I knew you would.
and it's also very, I mean, given what we know about like how old the oral traditions that fairy tales are based on really are, that's like, to say that they contain apocalyptic visions of Christ is really just reinforces that
The whole thing.
that Christ really is the foundation of everything.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
Yeah,
that's great.
so what do you think about this idea of the marriage of the spirit and the soul? This is a little bit of an interesting thing because usually the bride gets associated with the church, and he's not saying that's not also.
No, I know. Yeah, this is the thing. Like I actually wrote that note, but I'm going to talk about it now because
Okay.
in the first in the second chapter, there's a statement there where it says the New Jerusalem does not lie in another world, but it does. Like, this is the thing. I recently watched a conversation with John Vervaeke, and this psychiatrist was detailing out a conversation he had with a client, and they were on the phone, and she was suicidal like most of her life, and she had brought up the subject of death. Okay, and she said something like death is life to him, and his immediate reaction was, oh my God, she's going to kill herself. Right? He's a psychiatrist, he's got to save this woman. And for some reason, it was during COVID, and he was working from home, and he had to go in his garage to have this conversation, and it was cold outside. He's from Manitoba, Canada. So, and he's in his garage, and the sun is shining outside, right? And he said, so this is how he described this conversation. So she's talking about death as life, okay? This coincidence of opposites, right? That Miguel was talking about. And he's in the garage, and every now and then he'd have to step outside into the sun to get warm because he was cold in the garage. And then he'd go back into the garage, and he said in the garage felt like a tomb. It felt like death because it's gray and dark and cold. And then he'd step out into the sun to warm up, and it would feel like life. And he said, and I somehow saw myself going, as she was talking about death and life, I was moving in and out of death and life. And I thought that image that he painted there is such a great insight, because this is what Bock gets at when he talks about these things in spiritual terms and materialistic terms, and that these two things need to be married together, right? So
Right.
we're having this, metaphorical conversation over here, and we're actually physically moving in and out of death and life at the same time. And I see this happening all the time, and we're very unaware of it. Like, for that guy to see that is well, it's not short of a miracle, really.
Well, it's also becomes clear why he doesn't talk about it in terms of like the church, because he's actually seeing this on an even more cosmic scale than that. Because ultimately, as you can see, as he moves on into chapter 12, when he talks about the New Jerusalem, when he's explaining what the higher ego becomes, it's like the higher ego essentially becomes the cosmos.
Yes.
Like it's able to.
Well, that's the headlessness that Harding talks about.
Right, exactly. That's exactly where I was like, oh, he's so in Harding territory right here. So that's why, because he's like, the very idea of thinking that, the very idea of thinking in the individual community binary would actually go against what he's trying to show you, which is that the I that is in Christ identifies with everything. This is why Jesus can say,
yes,
whatever you've done to the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me, because he's literally identifies with them like that. His eye extends to them.
Exactly.
He is a part of that. This is my body.
Yep.
This is my blood.
We talked about
this actually are.
I know. Like, we talked about it in these terms yesterday, Nate, in that conversation I had with Jess and Chris and Emily. Because this actually never, I think it was with you that we had that conversation about creativity and, the imagination being the infinite, right? Yes. And then bringing that down, taking, like, if you're creating something, let's say you're an artist, and you're imagining what you could create, and you've got all these colors and ideas and shapes and sizes, and, and you've got to bring them down and put them on a canvas. That's putting the infinite into the finite.
Which is really just a focus point of attention, right?
Right.
Because it's like the source that it's being born out of is still an infinite source.
Yeah.
But you're not letting your consciousness like be like overwhelmed by the infinite. You're allowing it to come to a point of focus.
Right. But it's also an incarnation.
Yes.
Right? Because you're giving this thing, this infinity, a body, right, on the canvas. Right. But then we were talking about it in light of the book of Job. And what happens to Job is he goes down, like in that poem, he goes down, right, to the very bottom and demands from God an answer. He wants to know them. Jess and I talked about this in privately yesterday a little bit, and I'm still thinking about it. But Job wanted to be uncreated, but that wasn't a demand. He didn't ask God for that. He didn't say, uncreate me. He said, I want Leviathan to come up and uncreate me and uncreate everything, right? But his demand to God was, indict me. Tell me what I did wrong. And so there, in that moment, he inquires into the infinite from the very bottom of his soul. He's at the bottom, right? He's in ashes, covered in sores, lost everything. He's at the very bottom, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. And it's right then that God opens up the infinite to him, right? So, right. so this is the thing. When you go down into, you encounter the infinite.
Right.
That's what happens.
Right.
Right. So you take the infinite, you make it particular, and then you go to the bottom of that particularity, and again you encounter the infinite. Right.
Well, and by going to the bottom, I mean, what that means is you have to give up. The lower ego has to give up everything that it tries to claim for itself in order for that. In order for Christ to be born within, like you won't really, like you can say mouth words.
Yes. Yeah, you can do.
But you won't actually have Christ dwelling in you until you have had the lower ego let go of its desire to possess things for itself, because you
Right,
can't
and
ever
perhaps
open,
that's
because you won't ever go down to the bottom and then open up again to the whole. You
right,
can't make that movement.
right, and that's perhaps what that poem in the Book of Job is talking about, is the lower ego, right?
I think
Going
so.
going so far down into the depths.
And I actually think that Job actually is, that's what Job is like.
Yes.
Job is like the, he is the lower ego in its best mode.
Well, this is
Being
the thing.
broken apart in order to be born into the higher.
Well, Bock says that the key
Which is
ingredient.
why he regains everything more.
Yeah.
And in the epilogue, right?
Well, that's the resurrection. Yeah,
Because,
he's
right,
restored.
exactly, because that's actually what happens. It's like, paradoxically, it's like you're afraid of losing everything,
Yeah.
and you're trying to cling to it, and like, and you're fighting against the all the pain and suffering of life, and just trying to cling to whatever you can.
Yeah.
And you are reborn the moment you actually fully let go.
But you have to get there. Like Bock. Okay, I wanted to say this.
You have to get there the hard way. I don't think
Yeah.
there's anybody gets there the easy way,
No, but
honestly.
you actually have to get there by thinking, because the whole Book of Job
That's true.
is reason. Okay, it's a struggle with reason. The three
Right.
friends are
Right.
talking. Job has to plow his way through those people. He has to reject them over and over and over again, and he has to believe in this thing that exists down at the very bottom.
Yeah, but they're also throwing they're also throwing presuppositions about him, legalistically throwing presuppositions.
Well, that's reason, though, isn't
Right.
it?
Right.
That's reason itself.
I'd say I don't know if that's, I kind of distinguish between reason and rationality.
Okay, well, okay, yeah, that's
I
fine.
think reason can probably be united with faith, and a reason there's a spiritual mode to reason.
Well, there
I
has
think
to.
that's more like a rationality, and it's like it's basically a coping mechanism.
Well, Bob talks about
It's
that,
our
though.
way of, yeah, okay, go ahead.
He actually, because this is where I did a lot of underlining and note taking here. Let me see.
Lay it on us.
So he says here,
What page are you on?
169 at the top, first sentence. The pictures of the red, white, and pale horse represent the loss which man would have to endure if he drew down the divine forces of thought deeper into his own nature. That's what I was just saying, and correspondingly into earthly darkness. The original revelation of God must be lost. Okay, that's original participation.
Right.
But if after passing through the dangerous valley of egohood, humanity desires to find the power to rise again, this cannot be done without thought. We must resist the temptation through growing weary of our abstract, shadowy thinking, of throwing overboard the heritage of past millennia of thought in order to live out of natural instinctive forces of the soul. In our age, this danger has become acute. Even though our thinking has fallen into mere intellectualism, we must not lose faith in thinking as such. We must determine to redeem our thinking from the fact that our present ways of thought no longer furnish help for the most intimate concerns of life. Christian theology and practice in the last 1,000 years have been equally to blame for allowing knowledge based on thought to fall out of the sphere of religion. So I thought that was really pertinent to a lot of the conversations that we have as a group and here on this channel, because it's so easy for us to disrespect our thought, the way that Bock is talking about it here, grow weary of our abstract, shadowy thinking and throw overboard the heritage of past millennia, right? And just want to kind of go with the flow, right? Mm-hmm. And I know even I have am guilty of that, right. I am guilty of that.
Right.
But but the thing that I always have to deal with my own self is, even though I think that
He
way,
is talking about a different mode of thinking though, because that's why he's talking about, like, he talks about how, like, he acknowledges how our modern mode of thinking has gone like completely astray.
right, but you
So what
can't make
he's
that judgment though before you've gone through it. Like, this is the thing. What he's saying
right,
to me, what he's saying there is, it's these levels, right? It's that wisdom poem. Like, you have to get past all that superficial thinking, abstract thinking, and intellectualism to get to the bottom.
he also points out somewhere near that same section, he also talks about how, like, the thinking that he's talking about, this is how you know that it's still connected to spirit, because he also talks about the need of going beyond, like, the material perceptible senses,
Right.
and relying on the spiritual senses as well.
Right.
So
But he says
so
here
you
that
can't do the kind of thinking if you're shut off from your spiritual senses, which are imagination, intuition, and what's the third one? Trying to remember from earlier in the book.
Intuition, imagination, and it might even be reason, is it? I don't remember.
No, it wasn't reason. So one of them was, I know he related one of them to feeling. So intuition was the one he related to feeling. Imagination was related to sight. And then there was one that was related to hearing.
Is it perception?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
So I don't know. I to me, like, this is not Bock, this is me. I think that the spiritual hearing is like, has something to do. It's like, it's closely related to
Oh yeah, I was talking about the trumpet.
music, because it has to do with an ability to listen to the harmony that's actually there if you're listening, right?
Mhm.
So it's not distracted by the cacophony of sounds that often can present themselves in the world. It's basically the ability to hear the music of the spheres.
So kind of a discernment. Would it be
Yeah,
like-
I don't remember what his actual term is, but
yeah.
I think that's connected to this idea. But the point is that you have to be open to your other senses, which you definitely have.
Well, see, this
Everyone
is
everyone has
total depravity, though.
everyone has them. What we've done is that we've just deadened them, because
And we've dismissed
we've
them.
gone
with
right, exactly. What was that?
We've dismissed them with this idea of total depravity.
Right, and I think that's part of that and the hermeneutic of suspicion.
Yes. Yes.
So yes, total depravity, because that plays a role, because it frankly, it just doesn't, it makes human beings weaker than they are.
Well, it makes you can't trust yourself. If you can't trust yourself, like if you're, see, this without getting into that whole ball of wax, I just want to say this is the thing.
Yeah, because
I found
I don't think Bock is a universalist, by the way.
No, but this is the thing.
I think he believes that, I don't know, he's actually not clear.
No, he's
he
not
definitely
clear.
believes in some kind of annihilationism for people that cannot break free from, although he gives them multiple lifetimes to do it, and he does believe in reincarnation. There's a footnote where he talks about reincarnation. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. But total depravity doesn't necessarily have to do with heaven and hell either. Like you can look at that philosophically.
No, actually, yeah, right, exactly. I don't. In fact, I think that's actually the least interesting bit.
It is.
Go,
because
please.
because to me, what it does is it doesn't allow you to have faith in yourself and And I think in order to know, like, if you're going to make that journey down and have the infinite open up to you, then you need to have the courage and the humility, which Bock talks about, right? The courage and the humility to make that hero's journey, really, inside of yourself, right? You can't think that whatever you're going to encounter there is just tainted and wrong all the time.
Well, it also pretends that you don't have a spirit at all.
How so?
Because you can, if you don't, you would have to believe, in my opinion, that
you mean the breath of God spirit?
Correct. There can't be, there can't be. You would have to see that somehow as being withdrawn.
Yeah.
Under the curse of Adam, right? So you'd have to see that as like, but I don't think we actually have a warrant for that. Like,
no, that's not explicit in that idea anyways, like that's been removed as far as I know. That's not really explicit, is it?
Right, the entire
theology?
What was that?
In that theology, that's not made explicit that the spirit.
No, I don't think it's made explicit. I'm saying that it's like it's a natural, it's a caveat that follows from its own internal reasoning.
Yeah.
Is that actually you could not believe that there was such a thing as like,
well, you're denying it,
a spirit that is a fractal of the divine within every human being. You couldn't.
Well, that's where it becomes incoherent, because how do you marry those two things, right? The divine and
right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the incarnation is possible, because that was always there to begin with.
Exactly.
It's just a restoration and a reconciliation process.
Yeah.
Of bringing things back to where the and it wasn't a plan B either. So
no,
in some ways, it's better because of what we've gone through.
Well, this is the thing, like Job had to go through that, the U-shaped journey is a pattern that indicates that you have to go down to the bottom. Jesus went to Hades and came back up again. Bock is saying that you've got to go through all that uncomfortableness of your thinking and your intellectualism. You have to go through that. You can't skirt around it. Because
and we can't think of, I will also say, in terms of like just on the Jesus descending into hell, like divine actions, the actions of the divine are not things that we can think of strictly in terms of, oh, it happened as a historical event in a particular point in time, and then it never happened again.
Well, that's why I'm saying
to misunderstand the nature of the divine.
Exactly. That's why I'm saying all of them at the same time, because they're all the same story.
Christ will continue to descend into hell until the restoration of all things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and Christ in you will also continue to descend into the hell of your own being.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like that's the descent into hell is the story of how Christ redeems us all.
That's right. That's the U-shaped journey.
Exactly. That's precisely it. That's precisely it.
That's exactly what it is. And
the reason for that descent is that we need to burn away and let go of all the things that we're trying to say.
But that journey can only be done with the two key. You have to have courage and humility, Bock says. I don't know where it is here, but I underlined it somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Courage and humility.
That line stood out to me too, because I've always maintained that there's actually a relationship between courage and humility.
You have.
And that they usually go together.
Yeah. And I mean, that is what the hero's journey fairy tale. If you want to get into the fairy tale thing here, like he talks about the fairy tales of Snow White, right?
Right.
And Sleeping Beauty, but the hero's journey is one of courage and humility, right? The hero, he's a hero because of his humility. He's also a hero because of his courage.
Right.
So, yeah. I don't know where
and also the hero's journey also follows the same U-shaped pattern too.
It does. Yes.
So.
Yeah. It's might be here where it talks about this. I'll just read it.
I would say that the hero can be seen as like as an intimation of like the striving toward the higher ego as well.
Yeah. Yeah. By going down to the bottom. See, this is again
Right.
focusing in on
into, that's why the hero descends into the underworld.
right. It's the mining of the finite in order to have the infinite open up to you.
Right.
It just keeps blaring that at me.
Yeah,
you know?
it's like, yeah, it's just like, yeah, all layers of the same cake.
Yeah, totally. So I'll just read this little bit here.
Okay. Is this on the courage and humility part?
I'm kind of it's hinting at it. I don't think he mentioned it directly, but he talks about the call to the wedding has sounded.
Yes. Okay.
Close as he is now to Christ, John's soul is still only full of humility and devotion. Quote, and I fell at his feet to worship him. This is really interesting here.
Oh, yeah.
But he receives an answer which exhorts him to assume quite a different spiritual attitude. Quote, see thou do it not. I am thy fellow servant and of thy brethren. Unquote. It seems surprising at first that Christ should reject the worship of man. But at this stage of evolution, he wishes to be the friend and brother rather than the Lord of man. Does not this remind us of a most sacred scene in the Gospels? On Maundy Thursday, Christ has washed the disciples' feet and celebrated the holy meal with them. After the meal in St. John's Gospel, Christ gives the disciples the instruction which is commonly called the Farewell Discourses. One of the central points is the words, henceforth I call you not servants, I have called you friends. Verse 15. Where the mystery of communion is fulfilled, there is the dawn of freedom. Humility must be united in the soul with courage.
Yeah.
For Christ wills not only to be brother and friend to man, he also expects that man should summon up courage to become a friend of God and a brother of Christ. In St. Paul's words, not I, but Christ in me, will have no reality unless man ventures to bridge the gulf which separates God and man.
And that right there is what the problem with depravity is, because depravity is really great about the humility part, sort of.
To me it's a false humility.
Right, I would say that too.
Yeah.
But one could make an argument at least it's pointing toward humility. But it's very hard for it to inspire you to the courage to have the courage to bridge that gap.
No, because it gives you the sense that if you want to go there, you're actually going to face the demonic. Like you're actually going to inquire into the darkness, right?
Right.
That's what it is.
And it gives you, and it also makes you, like, it presents such a terrifying picture of God that it's hard to see God as your friend.
Oh yeah, that too.
So it's like, I don't know if I want to go
he
there.
says after that, he says, faith as humility and courage of the soul alone makes possible the indwelling of the Christ ego in the human ego. And then further down, he says, immediately after the seer John experiences the octave of that hour in which he lay on Jesus's breast and heard his exhortation to friendship with God, the heavens open and the picture of the white rider appears to him. Through the grace of communion, man must grow mature enough to look into this picture as into a mirror.
Right. This is what the throne visions were about of the Hebrew temple mystics, right?
Yeah.
Seeing that enthroned figure.
Yeah.
Right. So like that is the image of divine humanity, which Christ is the fulfillment of.
Mm-hmm. And fairy tales use the mirror that way too.
Right.
Like and
think of the Rublev icon of the Trinity too, which has the mirror.
Yeah.
Right on it, on the icon.
Does it? I never noticed.
Yeah.
That.
Oh yeah.
Where is that?
Well, you can't see it, like, but it originally actually had a mirror on it.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like an out-facing mirror.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's
Wow.
like they're inviting you in to join their
Yes.
fellowship.
Yes. Yes. And where what is a mirror
And they're
for?
seated around a table
What is a
too.
mirror? What is a mirror for, Nate? Looking at yourself.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's like, yeah,
This is it, right?
that's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the,
We've
it's like,
solved it. It's all good. We can go home now.
well, all the Protestants who don't really believe in theosis will be totally triggered, but
Yeah.
our Orthodox friends will get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it took me a long time to figure out the mirror because I thought the mirror was, I actually originally, and this might come from where I was standing at the time.
We see
So
through a mirror darkly,
the mirror
Sherry.
just showed me myself, which was like totally depraved, right? And it was only magic when it didn't show me myself, but it showed me the other world behind it.
Think about what we're talking about now, and think about what we're talking about now, and now think of of the verse we see now through a mirror darkly,
I know.
right?
I
So it's
know.
like so it's tarnished, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so
But now I realize that it's the looking in the mirror actually that opens it up to the infinite beyond, like the world beyond, right? I think actually, what's his name, Bock here, he talks about,
well, because it's the only way that your eye can then be extended in the way that he's talking about. Like he talks about that mostly in the
well, he
talks
talks about
about
the eye. Remember where he talks about the eye, like the eye as in the capital letter I? Here it is,
yes,
right here.
yeah,
Let
yeah.
me read this because,
Go for it.
yeah. The second name of the rider on the white horse is not actually spoken. He had a name written that no
Right.
man
Yes.
but himself. There is one name that can always be spoken by the one who bears it. This is the secret of the little word I, not EYE, but the capital letter I.
Right.
Everyone can say I only of himself. No one can apply this name to anyone else. But this name of the rider on the white horse contains yet another secret. Besides the fact that no one except the bearer of it can utter it, no one except himself can even understand it. If we simply say I to ourselves, we indicate thereby our human personality so far as we are conscious of it. We cannot stop short at this I without becoming closed in and spiritually sterile. And that's the mirror that you don't see through, right?
Right.
We must strive to provide a home in our I for a higher being. The words not I, but Christ in me teach us to be I in such a way that another says the word through us.
Right.
This is the secret hidden in the second name of the White Rider. It indicates the ego which is filled by God and so bears the divine I in the human I, which is theosis. Thus, the second name becomes the seed or bud of the third. This name is written on the robe which the rider wears. It is white but sprinkled with blood. The harmony of white and red, so often painted in the Apocalypse, appears again on a new and higher level. The colors of spirit and soul are united. But here it is no longer the human soul's own inner warmth which meets the light of the spirit. The blood of man unites with the blood of Christ. Here is the mystery of the Grail. The soul purified by the indwelling Christ grows into union with the spirit. And then he goes on to talk about the logos. And what that word means.
Yeah, and then toward the end of that section, he does. There's one thing that he does that I found interesting. He views so in terms of the marriage of the spirit and the soul,
Yeah.
he views the soul as feminine and the spirit as a masculine. And
Masculine, yeah.
I would have said the opposite. I would have said the opposite.
Yeah, but I thought that was kind of interesting, though.
I'm not quite sure why he says that.
Yeah.
I think because of the association of the spirit with the higher ego and the Christ being
Well, he
is
he equates
why.
that to the child born of the woman, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And also I can see that too because of the association with femininity and earth.
Yes.
So, and soul is connected to earthly embodiment, feminine is associated with earth. So that's so there are, I can see why his reasons for saying that,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure I agree.
I'd have to think about it more.
That are reasons that are way beyond the text.
Yeah.
And that I won't get into.
Okay.
Well, it has to do with like, I think that, well, I just think that that, yeah, that's too much of a sidetrack. I won't get into it. What I did want to talk about, I might bring it some other time in the context of another conversation.
Okay.
But I did want to talk about, like, was this pushing on this, he says some really interesting stuff toward the end of the last chapter. Let me see if I can find it. Oh yeah, there we go.
What page
this is it. This is great. This is really okay. All right. I'll start from, this is on page 188. I'm starting at the bottom.
Oh, the last chapter.
Last paragraph on page 188. I'm starting there. If the golden crystals, he's talking about the symbolic meaning of the different features of the New Jerusalem here.
Okay.
And I won't go through all of it. I just want to read this one section. If the golden crystals show that the sun is once more in the Christ-filled earth, so the precious stones show us once more differentiated wealth of the stars is contained in it. Through the love of man's heart, earth becomes sun. Through the spiritual purity of his thinking, the earth becomes star-like, radiant, a concentration of the whole starry firmament. The predominance of jasper as the first and noblest of precious stones links the pictures of the beginning with those of the end. In the 4th chapter, between the messages of the seals, he who sits on the throne, father of the worlds, is pictured as a jasper stone. He does not appear in human form, but as a center of rays, flashing and shining like a precious stone. The power of pure thinking passes over the beings of God to man. There is a hint of this also in the story of the Holy Grail, for it is said that the chalice of the Grail was cut out of jasper. As man becomes world, he causes creation itself to assume the starry continents of God. In the eternal city, the enthroned one becomes the world. The creator becomes the creation.
Beautiful. That resonates with me.
Yeah.
All I can say. Yeah.
So that's, and he's talking about like essentially, and he also talks about like humanity become, essentially he's doing this like Harding like progression of levels, right? Like in this last section, and it's like, and it's like, in fact, and it lets me see once again where I don't know if Harding read Barfield or if he read Steiner or if he read Emil Bock, but there's just such an alignment to me in their thinking that and the whole time we were discussing Harding, I couldn't help but see like the similarities.
Yes.
So yeah. And that's ultimately, I would also say that refusal of that, there's something about withdrawal of participation that is actually like really tied to being buried within the lower ego. Like it's like that we have gone deeper and deeper into celebrating the lower ego consciousness, the further we have become advanced in our withdrawal of participation. Now that's cracking apart right now. Like there's like, we're like, everyone's sick of it, and no matter what your politics are, no matter what whether you consider yourself a believer or a non-believer, a Christian, whatever, it seems to me that like the entire world is like sick of that story of the modern age.
Well, it has a bottom.
That is left, right, exactly. So we've reached the bottom of modernity. And everyone's tired of a world of dead objects, and they're all trying to find different coping mechanisms in order to try find something alive again.
Yeah. Yeah.
and enchanted again. And so yeah.
Yeah. But this is the utility of Barfield's advice, Bock's advice, even Harding's advice, is that you have to mine your way there, right? Like you have to get through all that crusted, ossified stuff in order to and get to the bottom of it, right? You have to dig your way down, in other
But
words.
Jordan Peterson told me I could just eat a mushroom and that would be fine. I'd have straight shortcut.
What?
We love you, Jordan. I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, that's magic, and magic always comes with a cost. And
Right.
Jordan does talk about unearned wisdom, so I don't know where.
Actually, did you remember the part where there's actually a part in this where he talks about magic? He talks about like the
does he?
white magic of Christianity, as opposed to
I didn't quite finish the last chapter. I have to confess.
The dark sorcerers. Okay.
So.
Well, I don't remember exactly what the section is, but I can tell you, like, what that made me think of, honestly, was it made me think of poetic diction, to be honest with you. It has to do with the way that we use language. I think that both the sort of like the sorcery of our own age, which is expressed in the sciences through a materialistic, viewed solely through a materialistic lens, right? Where it becomes solely about acquisition of power.
Yeah.
That's sorcery. That's what it is.
Yes. Yeah. And it's the back door.
To gain control over to gain control over your environment, to gain control over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But you're actually not supposed to be you're supposed to try to be becoming it and identify with all of it. So it's the opposite movement of what you should be making. You shouldn't be trying to possess it and control it. This is a deep disagreement I have with Pageau and Peterson, is I think they kind of implicitly, both of them kind of implicitly endorse dominionism, which I think is a mistake. Because I think that I don't think we can fulfill our role properly as long as we're in that mentality. Like we can't be trying to, we cannot be trying to control and possess it, like, and manipulate it. That's just, that can't be it. We have to actually be identifying with it.
Becoming.
Right. Like we have to be learning how to extend our eye.
Mm-hmm. That bit that you read there's before that in that same chapter, because I did get into that chapter, I just didn't quite finish it. I actually had that marked out because he talks a little bit about that man becoming world, which might be helpful just to the people who are listening.
Yeah.
With the vision of the heavenly Jerusalem, 7, the number of time, gives way to 12, the number of space, which I love. Yeah. When the number 12 makes its appearance, we enter a spiritual temple, which is a variation of the dome of the stars, encircled by the 12 signs of the zodiac, which is what you find, not the zodiac.
Do we want to briefly explain why 7 is symbolic of time and 12 of space really quickly? It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, you can.
So the reason 7 is a symbolic number of time is that it represents the week, which is like this very basic measure of time that as we all experience it. So it represents a like sort of like almost the smallest possible. Well, it's not. I guess a day is the smallest possible cycle of time, but it's like the smallest possible complete cycle of time. Can we put it that way?
Yeah.
Right. But like it's a full structure. There's a fullness to. Symbolically, the number 7 comes to represent time itself, which is an endless cycling of that.
Yeah.
And then space, it's actually tied exactly to the zodiac, because the zodiac represents basically that is what it always is represented, as the fullness of space. Like
yeah.
It's the relation of the cosmos to the.
It's also the 12 months, right? Which
Yes.
is only indicated by the movement of the Earth's orbit, which to the ancient mind would have been the movement of the stars, of space.
Correct. Around
right?
the Earth. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What got me here is that the dome of stars encircled by the 12 signs of the zodiac. It's kind of what you see when you walk into an Orthodox church, only it's the apostles, you know.
I
and
love the
Christ.
Orthodox churches are just so stunningly beautiful.
Yeah.
They really are.
And it's a
Or they
dome.
can be.
It's a cosmic dome
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
So anyway,
My Anglican church needs to pick up its game in the beauty department. I'll say that
yeah.
right now.
Anyone reading, I go where the dome is. That's doesn't matter what you want to call it. If it's an Orthodox church, but I'm going where the dome is.
You go where the dome is. Yeah, the dome is so, like, I don't know how every church doesn't have a dome. Like,
I know.
how is it like, like, do you not understand what communion really is? Come on, get with the program, people.
Yeah, I just finished reading this. Anyone reading through the whole book of the Apocalypse with a feeling for numbers will share in the experience of Parsifal when he was in the precincts of the Grail, time here becomes space. Out of the ever-moving stream of time, we come to a cosmic castle of the Grail. The dominion of the number 7, governing everything that is in constant movement within the human being, is left behind. The number 12 reveals its mysteries because the concentrated inwardness here becomes an outer world again. Building is taking place and a world is being founded. Man becomes world. After the seer has described the dimensions of the heavenly Jerusalem, the wall with the 12 gates guarded by 12 angels, and on the gates the names of the 12 tribes of the Old Testament, on the foundation of the names of the 12 apostles of the New Testament, embellished with the 12 precious stones and the 12 pearls, the angel with the golden reed takes the measurements and proclaims it is the measure of man. The spiritualizing of the new creation is at the same time a humanizing of it. Isn't that just gives me goosebumps.
Because it's through us that it's accomplished.
I know.
Like, because Christ shares our nature. So like, we're by definition involved.
Right. And this is, I'm just going to read this just to close out. I think we're probably almost done here. But
I read a weird comment on Twitter this morning from someone who was like saying that whatever the imago Dei is, and for the human being, it can't be tied to the human body. But it's like, what? I'm like, how could it not be? Are you denying the incarnation? Like, to say that the human body has nothing to do with it is to deny the incarnation. It's like,
yeah.
So yeah.
Well, you know, this is, when I was reading this portion of it here, I couldn't help but think of the quote in the beginning of The Signature of All Things. It's not written by Böhme, it's written by a different guy, and I always forget his name, but the best treasure that a man can attain unto in this world is true knowledge, even the knowledge of himself. For man is the great mystery of God, the microcosm or the complete abridgment of the whole universe. He is the Mirandum Dei opus, God's masterpiece, a living emblem and hieroglyphic of eternity and time. And therefore, to know whence he is and what his temporal and eternal being and well-being are, must needs be that one necessary thing to which all our chief study should aim, and in comparison of which all the wealth of this world is but dross and loss to us. Isn't that incredible?
That's incredible. And you know, that it's interesting that, because that makes me, there was a part of the conversation that Sam had with Paul and John Vervaeke, where Vervaeke made a claim that that the old Neoplatonic model didn't work.
Yeah, that it had to be, yeah.
And I think he was talking about the cosmological model, because he said something about reflection. So I think he was talking about that microcosm, macrocosm kind of view. But and what, how, where's the warrant for that? I just don't like, what do you mean it doesn't work?
I don't, yeah, I
What
don't
do you
know.
mean by work? What do you mean by successful? It
Yeah,
seemed like you mean because it doesn't describe the physical universe accurately? Is
well,
that what you mean? Why
see,
do you think that's ever what it was really about?
John's trying to make his metaphysical ideas work in a scientific realm.
Mm.
And Bock says that you can't remove
Yeah,
them
but look at
from
Rupert Sheldrake though.
yeah, but
He's writing
yeah,
books on the physics of angels.
but Rupert Sheldrake goes to church. You
Yeah, he's
see,
Anglican, right? He's
yeah,
on my team.
yeah, he hasn't divorced himself from religion.
Right, right.
That's the problem. Like Bock
Right.
says it right here. He says, I'll just read it. I think I have it underlined. I have to double check.
Give me a page.
If I find it. Where is it now? I often think I have it underlined and then I find out I didn't. Here, page 169.
Okay.
Christian theology. It's the end of the first paragraph. Christian theology and practice in the last 1,000 years have been equally to blame for allowing knowledge based on thought to fall out of the sphere of religion.
Right.
And that's what Rupert Sheldrake hasn't done. He hasn't allowed it to fall out of the sphere of religion. But I think John's project is more, he's trying, he's consciously avoiding the sphere of religion and trying to
Well,
make,
I think part of that is because he's wanting
calls it
to,
religio, right? But
I think that, I think that part of that is he's trying to find something for the nuns, and there's actually like, Michael Martin in his newest blog, he said some nice things about Raviki in there. Like he mentioned, like bringing up awakening to the meaning crisis to like a student, and he expressed like some sympathy to like, because to Derrida also suggests the idea of like a religion that was not religion.
Mhm.
So and he kind of like indicated some sympathy to that because of like the failings of the institutional church. But I think ultimately, like, Christians need to wake up and hold the church to be accountable, and not to accept a stagnant, dead tradition. Like we have to be able um to recover the vibrancy that's in the tradition. It's still there. So I'm not anti-tradition at all. I'm actually saying it's actually in the tradition. We've just like we've lost the meaning of it. A lot of it. We don't and it's because of modernity that we don't even have the right categories to think in a lot of the times. So we're hampered. So this is why it's important that Bach also talks about like, yes, we have to use thinking in order to advance faith, but the kind of thinking that we're doing now is actually worthless intellectualism,
Mhm.
like in modernity.
You know, when Bock was talking about some of the what's the name of his religion, Christian
It's called the Christian community. It's a very
Christian
simple
community,
name. Yeah.
right? Okay,
Which
so
is basically it's a highly liturgical form of
yes,
um,
Christianity,
a very explicitly a Christian expression of anthroposophy,
yes,
essentially. So
yeah,
it's a combination of anthroposophy and Christianity, and it is highly liturgical,
yeah,
and it's quite seriously so, because he talks about transubstantiation
yeah.
in multiple senses, and he understands transubstantiation in the deepest sense because he's understanding that like
Well, it's
this
incarnational.
right. And that it's headed toward Christ being all in all, which is what it means for humanity to become a world, and
Mhm.
then ultimately for for the creator to become the creation.
Yeah.
So, or to enter into the creation.
I'm just
So
gonna express some of my own struggles. These are personal struggles that I have.
yeah, go for it.
Is that because I haven't been a churchgoer for since 1998. Okay.
Right.
And when I said earlier, I'm going where the dome is,
Yeah.
I really meant that. Okay.
Yeah.
That's to me, I feel like one of the three wise men just following the star, you know.
You can always just go outside
Well,
if you
see,
want the
this is
dome.
why, because that's what I did. That's what I've been
Right.
doing for many,
Right.
many years, right?
Right.
And I struggle, and I don't know how valid my struggle is. Like, you know, it's my personal struggle, but I struggle with institutional anything Christianity wise, right? So, I mean, I could focus in on the failure of any kind of institutional form of Christianity, and I did that for many years, and it wore me out because, you know, you're just never going to find a perfect place to go to church, right? It's not going to happen.
Right.
But like when I hear you and even Pajot and other people talking about, well, the church has to be resurrected, the church has to die and be resurrected, I often wonder if it loses its institutional what do you call it, qualities completely, and it just becomes the dome. Like, I wonder if maybe what I've been doing for the last 20 odd years is being in that church, right? That because church did die for me.
Right.
Excuse me. And it was resurrected in the dome above me, right? And I haven't failed to grow as a person in Christ as a result of that. Like, my moving away from the institution, the buildings, didn't hinder my growth at all. On the contrary, okay? And that's the sticking point for me.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Because you know a tree by its fruits. That's really a measuring stick for me, right? And so I'm like, okay, so how, like, I've had people all through that long period of time saying to me things like, well, you really need to get into a community, and that's not really healthy, and you know, you need to be active, and you have to have this social, you know, bonding, and whatever, however they wanted to phrase it, you know, you need to go and worship, you need to. And none of that was missing in my life, and it was always on a spiritual level. Even the interactions I had on a daily basis with my neighbors, with my animals, with people that come and stay with me, you know, it was very sacred. Everything was sacred. Okay. Everything is sacred. And that's how I see the world. And so I don't take anything for granted. Nothing. Any contact that I have with anything has meaning to me. Right. So I just don't know what to do with institutional Christianity, Nate. Honestly,
Right. Well,
I struggle.
Sherry, look at the desert hermits.
Yeah.
Where they, I mean, like there are lots and lots of, there are saints who have taken a path of like not participating in a community or being part of the institutional church.
Yeah.
So it's not like I don't think that's not a
It's not
requirement.
unusual.
It's
Yeah.
not a requirement. I think it is. I really think that actually, boy, I have very strong opinions on this, as you
I
probably
know. That's
know.
why I'm talking to you about it.
And right. And my primary thing is that I think the church is supposed to be an actual community, not just a community like in a like,
But that to me is the
oh,
world.
this is, what was that?
That to me is the world.
Right, but you have to start where you are.
I know.
You have to start where you have to start where you are. And like the church is the church, like ultimately, so I would agree, like to me, like the ultimate, like the church ultimately is the cosmos, right?
Mhm.
The creator becoming the creation is the end.
Yeah,
That's Bach has that entirely right. Like that is what's happening. That's what the union of heaven and earth means.
right.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, there won't be any there won't be any ontological gulf whatsoever.
Well, that's the
I
metaphor of
don't think there ever was, by the way. I think it's 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 an illusion
perception.
that
Yeah.
because of our own pride and fear and sin keeps us from seeing what is.
Hmm.
It's already the case. But because we are beings that are
You
designed
forget.
for communal living by nature, we need to have church communities that are actually fostering that. So as far as I'm concerned, everyone should be doing what the Hutterites are doing. Honestly, that's what I really think.
Yeah.
Um, and I particularly say the Hutterites as opposed to the Amish because I think the Amish are too disengaged. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that we can have Julian on Grail Country and have conversations with him, and like he still is interacting and engaging with the world, even though he's living in this community that's a Christian community that's very much focused on being a community and mutually supporting each other, and holding property in common. Like that's right.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's right. Even though I don't really, I mean, I don't really agree with all of their theology, but
Right.
ultimately, at the end of the day, that's like a secondary concern. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
like I think that's actually less than like, did you get your theology right? Is like less important than
How are you living? Yeah.
how are you living? Yeah, how are you living? Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the church is kind of like since the early days of the early church, where that's where it was doing, has like skirted that
Hmm.
responsibility to be a real community, like to not just be like it's allow itself to become compartmentalized and just like this facet of life. And it's like it's a community, but it's not a full community.
But don't you think that, like, not only is materialism breaking down, but a direct result of that is that the institutions are falling apart, they're crumbling, right? Because they are material.
But because they're material and secular, but that
Yeah.
doesn't, so why isn't this is that means it's the perfect moment for the church to start building real things.
Yeah, but I don't know if they should be building anything. See, this is my conundrum. Like,
Ah,
see, this is my conundrum.
why do you think the church shouldn't be? See, I definitely think that the church should be building things, engaging in positive action, because I think that's actually how the kingdom is advanced.
Well, I think that the coming down of the New Jerusalem, the transformation of the whore of Babylon, right? This picture, it's dome-like in its essence, right? Like it comes
Mhm.
from above and it covers, and the other thing sinks into the abyss, and
But
and
it's the 144,000 singing the new song that like essentially like call it.
true, that's true.
So
That's
like
But
so
where are they? Are they in an institution? No, they seem to
no,
be.
I don't think they're necessarily that's why this is where I would agree with you. It's like if the ecclesia if it so there's a like so the Pharisees weren't alone. The Pharisees of Jesus' time were not alone. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a tendency within clericism to develop Pharisaic tendencies. Like that's just like it's just human nature,
It is human. It is totally human nature. Yeah.
right? So
So see, but see,
people are
my,
gonna want to climb it. Like if you present it, any kind like any kind of hierarchy that you create, like humans are gonna want to try to compete against each other to climb to the top of it, and they're going to want to increase institutional power by implementing institutional control and all the kinds of things that we do.
mm-hmm.
And I um, I definitely don't. I'm not. I'm not anti-church in the same way I am anti-state in my anarchism, but I do think the church needs to think more deeply about its structures and what it's called to be.
Well, one of the reasons that I'm saying all this, and yet I'm a catechumen in the Orthodox Church now. Okay.
Right.
And that's what was a big decision for me, or like really big. And when I made it, I got the big seal of approval from the guy upstairs. Like, it was just, okay, yeah, you're good, keep going. So, but what I realize about that is that when I go into an Orthodox service, or I haven't really been, but attending them on Zoom or online, I don't have to think. Like this thing that like growing up in a Protestant, I'm sitting there with my Bible open, I got my pen handy, maybe even a notepad, right? And I'm listening to a sermon, I'm taking notes and I'm underlining, and my brain is fully engaged, right? But I walk into an Orthodox church and I'm under the dome, and I'm listening to the singing, right? The chanting, and I'm hearing the liturgy, and I'm surrounded by all this sensualness, right? The candles and the incense, and so to me, and I've thought about it a lot, it feels like it's the only place where I'm actually in that cosmic setting. I'm actually under the same dome that I live in, that I live under, right? That's how it feels to me. And it's for that reason that I chose to go there. I could think about a lot of things about the Orthodox Church, but none of those things have anything to do with my experience of worship in the church. They're all political or human, just simple human nature stuff, right? Infighting and whatever. I could think about all that.
And you're going to have that in any.
But you're going to have that anywhere. But that stuff I don't care about, because it's just the nature of being human and living together, right? And doing things together. But I don't want, this, one of the things I realize is I don't want to think when I go to church. I don't want to think, I want to be. And it seems to me that that's the only place that I can do that at this point.
Now, what would you say about that? Like, what you're just saying about not thinking, how would that mesh with what Emil Bock is saying about thought?
Well, I think that it's.
See, I think he's talking about. I think the way he's talking about thinking, it actually would include the category of what you're referring to as not thinking.
That's what I think he's talking about. Yes. Yes.
Because what the not thinking he's talking about is sort of just like.
It's the marriage of the bride, and that.
Well, it's like it's like the thinking. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's talking about like an elevated thinking that is open to.
Well, it's mind and body, right?
Right. And it's also, it's a heart thinking, to bring back like the Hebrew connection, right?
Yes.
So it's, if you think about, like, I've been listening to, so it's like I started listening to the Physics of Angels book on audiobook, Rupert Sheldrake's book, and he was talking about like I think he was I don't remember who he was quoting. I think it was Aquinas. But basically, like, angels are beings of pure intuition, right? Mm-hmm. So they don't actually they don't think in the way that we do.
No.
So if by thought all you mean by thought is intellectual processing at the propositional layer,
yeah,
that's not what he's talking about at all.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a way to think of, even though the way we talk about it, we think of participation as being a not thinking. In some ways, it's actually the deepest kind of thinking.
It's the deepest kind. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so that's part of what he's pointing to. That's why he says we can't give up on it, because there's no
Yes,
there's no other route back to that final participation.
exactly. Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. That's a little aside. I just had to get that off my chest because
no, I'm glad you talked about it. It's something that I have mixed feelings about too. I mean, obviously it's like, it's like I go to a regular, institutional church, even though I'm Christian anarchist. I'm not like Michael Martin having my house church. Although I think what he's doing is awesome. And I don't. Here's the other thing. It's like because of like ultimately the church is certainly not just the institutional church.
well, no, it isn't.
The
And
institutional, the
this can
institutional
also
church
just
is an
summarize.
expression of what is meant by the
Yeah,
term church.
yeah.
And I really strongly like part of like one of the ideas that is strongest, that is one of the strongest influences on me is Bulgakov's idea
Sobernos.
of soberness and the enchurchment of society. And it's like
Yes. And I'm
I'm
fully,
with whoever's doing that,
yeah,
whether they're an institutional church or not. If you're, because that's kingdom building.
yeah,
That's what that is. Like you're
exactly.
every step you take in that direction
Yeah,
is a movement toward, well, being part of the 144,000
yeah,
that are singing the
yeah.
new song
And like
and opening the,
you
basically,
are,
what was that?
in my case, I am faced with the dilemma of the communal and the particular, right?
Right.
Because I'm not participating communally, but which I think is actually kind of it's ambiguous, because I think that on a spiritual plane I am participating communally. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
But um so I'm not participating communally, but I am participating as an individual person. But I don't think that there is such thing as an individual, because I think on a spiritual plane we're all affecting each other anyways. So whatever I'm doing communally in the body. It
Right.
has a
And this was
ripple effect.
certainly how the church thought in earlier days, which is why people only attended mass like once a year. And the
Right.
priest performing the mass was considered good enough for the
Yeah.
entire community. And we've kind of lost that sense of interconnectedness, which I
Yes.
I definitely share with you. I mean, that's part of learning to see that interconnectedness is part of like learning to have that proper eye.
Yeah.
Like you gotta. It doesn't mean that your particularity doesn't matter or is irrelevant. Your
No.
particularity is still there.
Like you're not just floating like some free radical out there. Like you just,
Right. Your
you know.
particularity still matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not all that matters, which is kind of where where our culture is kind of. But I sympathize with you there, because it's like I'll tell you my own little like
Yeah.
I'm coming soon to where I'm gonna have to make a decision
Mhm.
about what I want to do, because like well, depending on the results of my PCR test, which I should get back in a couple days. If I get a negative result before Sunday, then this Sunday is our last catechism class.
Okay.
And I've been going to this Anglican church with my son, and but I haven't taken communion the whole time.
Mhm.
And like two reasons for that. One reason is that my son needs to be baptized, because I was in an agnostic phase when my son was little. And
Yep.
then when we did go to church, I went back to the Pentecostal church. And I wasn't a practicing Catholic anymore. Then more bouts of agnosticism. That was like a long standing problem with
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Partially because of my openness,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. 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 I can see that.
So in any case, um he was never baptized. And So so part of me was saying, well, I want to wait for him to be baptized, but then it's like, I don't even know, like I haven't decided if that's not really the only reason. The other part of it is like, I'm still really Catholic.
Mhm.
And I just like, and we've been going and going through the 39 articles of religion has just reinforced that for me.
Right.
And it's like, I really like these people. My son loves it here. He's so happy. It's a great little community. So it's like I have to make a decision. And
Right.
here's the thing, and like you, it's like, do I really think it matters? No,
Mm,
I don't. My
yeah,
conception of the church is not that small-minded,
no.
right? So even though I think Catholicism does get a lot of things right, and theologically I'm very aligned with Catholicism, that doesn't mean that I think it's the the only right
Yeah,
ship
yeah, yeah,
to be
yeah.
afloat in this ocean on.
Right. Yeah.
So, um, so I have to prioritize. It's like, okay, well, am I gonna put like what I'm gonna put? What am I going to put higher importance? Is it going to be doctrinal correctness, which is something I talk about not having a lot of meaning for me, a lot,
Hmm.
or am I going to put like loyalty to this community that I've now been attached to for some time, and like being in the same church with my son, like, so where's my
Yeah,
decision going
yeah.
to lie? And it's like, I mean I've said before that, like, as far as I'm concerned, like, acts of communion are happening all the time, and the church is the church is far broader than anyone understands,
Yes.
because he really is already in all things
Yeah.
for those who are able to see it.
Yeah.
And that participation is available to you, and there are many ways of engaging in that communion. um, Although I do think um, that the Eucharistic elements are a special form of that. um, but at the same time, it's like, to me, it's like when I celebrate Shabbat with my wife,
Hmm.
it's like, that's a communion too.
It is.
100% is a communion.
Yeah.
It even
Yeah.
has the bread and the wine.
Yeah. Of
And
course
I
it
think
is.
it's, and not only that, I think it's a valid communion. And I don't really care what the Catholic Church or any other church has to say about it.
No.
They're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they need to broaden their thinking.
Yeah. Well, see,
So
there's
so
this,
that's so there's that. This is how I actually think. That is what I actually think. That's my real opinion. But yet at the same time, I'm like, oh, should I do this? Should I enter into communion with these people who I, have, I'm already in fellowship with and have been for a long time? Should I actually enter into communion with them? Is actually something I really struggle with.
yeah. Yeah.
So we'll see. I'm talking to Father Big Mac soon. We'll see
Cool.
if yeah.
Well, maybe we're
That'll be
just the
interesting. We're gonna
marginally.
talk. That's who I'm talking about angels with. That's why I'm
Oh,
doing
right,
all
right, right,
the
right,
reading on
right.
angels. He wanted to talk about the angelology of St. Thomas Aquinas.
Cool. Well, that'll be interesting. Well, Nate, maybe we are the Marjolines that,
Right.
right?
Yes, right. Yeah, yeah, it's the
And I think
Marjolaines.
that's
Yeah.
why that whole talk really resonates with me, because I
But is
somehow,
that not ultimately, isn't that ultimately the meaning of St. Christopher, though?
yes, it is. It is the meaning of Saint Christopher.
Because the church needs to be, yeah, yeah.
And what role what role are the Marjolines playing? Are they the 144,000? Like, that's a thing.
I think they might be. I mean, honestly, I think they might be yeah, I think it's like, I think, that, or at least part of it, right? I think there are those souls that are within the traditional institutional church too, I think. Definitely are.
Mhm,
Um, and I kind of like, Paul's doing something interesting,
mhm,
even. Like,
mhm.
what he's doing is very, very interesting.
Yes,
Like,
Yeah.
And he's
He
like,
is me.
he's like stretching himself to his absolute limit in a way that's beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
And he's trying to come into a deeper and deeper understanding of
Yeah.
what this
I mean,
all
we can only
means.
move out from where we are, right?
Right.
That's all we can do. Yeah.
That's all we can do. Yeah. And it's, yeah, right. So we see what we see. and we don't know what we don't see.
Yeah.
So
Just some
yeah.
personal reflections there.
Yeah, no, that was an interesting. I know it was good to end on that note, because I think that
Yeah.
actually ultimately it ties to this. It actually does tie to what we're discussing, because like, well, if we look at what Emil Bock did, he had these ideas which are certainly, as far as I'm concerned, they're entirely Christian. He is like,
I think so too.
he's reading the scriptures. He's like, he's seeking Christ.
Well, Christ
He's
is at the center of everything. He
right.
is the
It's
center of
everything that he's talking about. Christ is at the absolute center of. And so he creates this Christian community, which is this, you know,
alternative.
fringe alternative, but yet highly liturgical and
Yeah.
traditional in some ways,
Yeah.
version of Christianity, that actually is, I wonder, I wonder, he was German. So I'm wondering if like how much of like the route he decided to go was just because of being German and from a predominantly Protestant part of Germany, and just like having such a natural bias against the Catholic Church, because he says some awfully Catholic things.
Yeah.
Awfully Catholic things. He believes in transubstantiation.
And those
He
churches.
talks about, he believes that there are 7 sacraments, not 2.
Yep.
I mean, he's very Catholic.
Mhm.
He even
Well,
has a high
he could have been Catholic. He could have been Catholic.
right,
I
right.
don't even know actually.
No, I think, well, I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay.
But I don't really know enough about his biography. I'm just speculating. So,
Yeah.
but I'm just wondering if like, just that like environmental hostility to, because what the time of history when he was writing this, it's like Catholics and Protestants did not play nice still.
Well, and this is in the 50s when he wrote this book. I mean, he wrote it earlier, right? But I mean, the Catholic Church.
He wrote it during the war and then has to
Yeah.
basically recreate it from memory.
Right. And I don't know. I mean, the Catholic Church didn't perform all that well in Nazi Germany. Let me just put it that way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, that's true. That's right.
So
this is another thing. Well, let's talk about that, because this is another thing. Let's talk about the failing, to just continue talking about the failings of institutional churches. It's like, yes. And like, that's the other failing, is like, why do you continue to pretend that you can tame the beast? Why do you think that you can make nice with the state? I don't understand this. It's like, how many times does history have to beat you over the head with this lesson that it cannot be tamed?
Yeah.
Before you learn. This is why you should not be allowing the state to be in control of our communities.
No.
That's why this is what I'm calling for the church to do differently. It's like, no, our communities should not be based around the state.
Yeah.
We should build Christian communities that are fully Christian.
Yeah.
So, and that doesn't mean necessarily that they're not open to people who aren't Christian either.
No.
It just means that they're going to be organized and run in accordance with Christian principles.
Well, you're going to have a conversation about all that soon, right?
What was that?
You're having a conversation about all that soon, I think.
Yeah, we do have. We do. It's kind of like, it's a little bit more narrow focus than that. I think we're talking about Christian anarchism, which informs my perspective. Although I'll be honest, my particular form of Christian anarchy is a little idiosyncratic, because it's so informed by Bulgakov, who's, 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100% 100 kind of Christian anarchist adjacent, but I wouldn't say actually Christian anarchist, although he has a very similar sort of ethos to
Well,
Christian
maybe you
anarchism.
just have to jump ship and get on the Sobernost one.
Yeah, sure Pajot would like that. But I'm already on this. I'm down for Sobernos. This is my form of
Yeah.
Christian anarchism. But in any case, but we're talking about Christian anarchism and its connection to theonomy.
Yeah.
So like whether there's any relation, like particularly of like this is a reform thing, and it's like there are some similarities in that basically theonomy often becomes a sort of Christian libertarianism.
Mhm.
So there's some kind of overlap, but I think that the problem with theonomy is that its reliance on Old Testament law, where I think Christian anarchism is more firmly rooted in,
The
you
new.
know, in Christ's reduction of the law,
Right. Right.
to what actually matters. And there's something wrong with the mentality that thinking that the actual letter of the law has any bearing anymore. That's an avoidance of the law of freedom that you're called into. That's why I'm a Christian anarchist ultimately, I think.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah. Well, I should sign off here, Nate.
yeah, no problem. It was a great conversation. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah,
Sherry.
it was really good. I really loved it. So we're done now.
Yeah, we're done.
We should
We
give
have
it.
should we get drop hints as to what our next book that we're going to
I think you
discuss
should.
is?
Yeah.
So our next book series is going to be on Valentin Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot. So
Buckle up, folks.
yeah, buckle up. We'll probably be doing that. That one is it's a very dense text. We'll probably break that down also to do a chapter at a time, and some of the chapters will probably be sufficiently complex that it might take multiple episodes even just to do.
Okay.
So we'll be doing that one for a while, but I'm looking forward to that. So thank you for joining me today, Sherry.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nate.
All right.